Hey, Mike, we got a book here. Can you tell us a little bit about this book?
Yes, this is a very controversial book because this is a story about Bigfoot habituation. The book was written by Mary Green. Mary's a researcher from Tennessee, and the story is being told by Janice Coy, who is a lady in Tennessee who claims that she had this experience. And the story is that her grandfather cut down a tree. The tree fell and injured a toddler Bigfoot. The grandfather took the Bigfoot, put it in his barn. He named it Fox, and he was looking after it because it had been knocked unconscious by the tree. So he had to care for it. A short time later, the parents of the Bigfoot came and took him out of the barn, recaptured him, and they were not angry. And this Bigfoot family went on to live in the area for upwards of 50 years while Janice Coy was, aware of their presence and having ongoing interaction with them. Now, one of the things she did while interacting with them, as the story goes, is that she learned some of their language. Now, her grandfather spoke about 5 dialects, Comanche, Sioux, and several others. Apparently, Fox the Bigfoot, over time, had learned to speak some Native American dialects in common. And the two, over the years, became more and more friendly because they got used to each other's presence because the man had been kind to the toddler, and he grew up knowing the man, and then by extension the granddaughter. And Janice Coy said that most of the time she would sit up in a tree and observe them from a distance because even though they were friendly, they were still kind of big and a little bit scary for a young woman, and she didn't like to get too close while she was taking her notes, and she used to take notes on their language. And in the book she has a dictionary of 200 or so words that she claims are Bigfoot words. She also shows how they relate to some of these other Indian dialects, words they have in common, or so she claims. Now, I don't know that any linguist of any respect or prowess has actually examined this book at length. It's funny that has never happened. But Scott Nelson, the linguist that we've had contact, who's been studying the Sierra Sounds, told us he was aware of the story, but it was his intention when we spoke with him last October to keep doing his research independently from the story in this book, and he wasn't really going to even take a look at this until he'd gone much further into his own research and the studies of the Sierra Sounds, because he didn't want to have this put any bias in his mind. What's interesting is the skeptics, of course, and even amongst people who are firmly convinced in the existence of Bigfoot, this is still considered to be very questionable, because most of those people are skeptical of this story. Now, in the book, there's, of course, nothing in the way of any really hard evidence to speak of, but there is some circumstantial evidence. They do have a few obscure photographs. This little speck in the distance is Fox, and Janice explained that they're very, very camera shy, that even when they would approach the house, they would always stay under cover, and that very seldom would they step directly out into the open to let them be seen by people. It was just something that was inherently part of their nature, was to stay hidden from people. But they did have some compelling evidence in here in the form of the notepads with the notes that Janice claims she took, where she was studying the words of the Bigfoot, and she would go to her grandfather with her phonetic spellings and ask for definitions, and that's how she evolved the dictionary. But they also had a fair amount of scat on the property. There were also, first of the scat, there was a barn there that they called the poop barn, and in that barn they would find the scat up on the loft. And the loft was about 8 feet up. There was no stairwell, no way to get up to the loft, and yet there was all this poop up there. So a man named Duncan, who's a Bigfoot researcher over on the East Coast, he went to Tennessee, met these folks, went up in the poop barn, And he said he very meticulously got a sample of this poop, and he had it tested. And they did a DNA test on the poop, and the DNA test indicated human, bat, and dog in terms of the different sequences that were found in the sample. And so the chemist who did this study said, well, apparently it's a dog that's been eating bats, and the human who collected the sample got some of his own DNA in there. Well, Mr. Duncan disagrees. He says he was absolutely aware of not getting any of his own DNA in there, and he's suggesting that the dog and the bat part might have been what the Bigfoot had been eating, and that the Bigfoot's DNA was just so close to human that it was scarcely noticeable. And that's why they had that human aspect thrown in. Now, the only other thing there to corroborate that concept, and it sort of does, is that they had these carcasses that they would find up in the trees, and amongst them were deer and also dog carcasses. So it is possible that these things in tough times were eating dogs. I can't rule it out. Now, it's also possible that this whole story is a made-up fantasy, and if it is, it's it's a major one. It's akin to the whole story of Tarzan the Apes. I mean, she has a language here. She's got their everyday habits. She tells us about the one of them who raped a local young woman, and she tells about a baby that was stillborn and they buried it, and she watched the ceremony. I mean, a lot of details are in this story. So if I were to give my impression of this, I would have to suggest this, and that is that it's quite possible that there is truth behind this story. But it's also quite possible that the truth has been embellished. Now, I know that since this book was published, Mary Green has gone public and stated that she knows for sure that some of the things that she was told by Janice Coy could not be corroborated with facts. They couldn't go dig up the baby that supposedly was buried. They could find nothing in the court records to substantiate the story of the rape. And when she was writing the book, she kept asking Janice Coy to come up with more evidentiary material to back up these claims. She couldn't do it. But I would also suggest that doesn't necessarily prove that all of it is fabricated. Because I've mentioned before that it's quite common when human beings have an experience with a Bigfoot that over a stretch of time, and I would think if there's an ongoing encounters going on, that would even tend to make it even worse, that people tend to augment their experiences when they tell the stories by maybe adding some facts and things that aren't completely true. In other words, people can get into embellishment, people can be involved in confabulation, and so you can have a story that's partly true and partly totally made up. And until you understand that, and understand that's part of the human condition, I would hesitate to just throw out these stories offhand just because they don't hit your gut quite right. Because sometimes the most bizarre things can be true.